Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about the season premiere of This Is Us, Season 5. Technically speaking, this is the first 2 episodes of the season, but they are put together as a 2-hour-long premiere. I knew from the creators' comments that this season would tackle COVID. I was curious whether they would also tackle Black Lives Matter and what happened with George Floyd. It seemed to me that it would be a missed opportunity for a show that hasn't shied away from dealing with racial issues in the past to not tackle this if they were also doing COVID. From the preview of the season, I gathered that they in fact were going to tackle that storyline. I was rather surprised that both ended up in the premiere. I thought they would do it throughout the season and not all in one episode, though I'm sure that they aren't finished dealing with this particular issue, and they shouldn't be. I will say right up front that this season premiere was outstanding. Lots of great scenes between the characters, and a few problems which I will most certainly be getting into. But all in all, it was an outstanding episode. Before I go any further, I will tell you that this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, I highly recommend you do go watch it, and then come back and watch my video. The first couple of scenes started minutes after the finale, and it was a pretty awkward attempt to shoehorn COVID-19 suddenly into the narrative, acting like COVID-19 was totally a thing that was happening last season during the finale, when it really wasn't. I literally found myself laughing during the first scene of this episode. Anybody bringing back a television show right now has 2 options. One, they can ignore COVID altogether, or they can bring it into the narrative. Both approaches are going to annoy people. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. Either way, a contingent of the fans is going to be unhappy. The creators decide to use it in the storyline, and their approach here is just not going to age very well from a narrative standpoint. We start off with Kevin and Madison talking about their twins that they're about to have, move to a Randall scene with his family and their reactions to COVID-19 and, oh no, Tom Hanks has COVID! And then we cut to the scene where Kevin has decided to go to Kate and Toby's house to tell them the news about Madison and the babies they are about to have, which would not be complete without a cameo from Timothy Amundsen, who plays Gregory. Kate and Toby are just absolutely adorable in the scene, and throughout the episode they're pretty great. Those who've actually listened to my videos or watched them or whatever know that I am not necessarily a fan of Toby and Kate, at least not their storylines. I like their characters fine, just not the stories they're given. Particularly frustrating last season. They both come off rather well during the course of this episode, and Kate demonstrates quite a bit of growth. Toby's reactions in this scene are just completely hilarious, and Kate, we're not even sure how she's going to react until the last moment when she's celebrating and telling them that they need to have a hair hug. They can't have a real one because of, COVID and all that. Kevin ends up making the decision to move in with Madison. The status of their relationship is a little unclear. It's not really clear if their relationship is entirely about the babies, because it's twins, or if they are trying to have some type of relationship. at least as far as in this scene. Randall agonizes about sending a text to Kevin congratulating him about the twins. This stems from the fight that the two of them had in the finale, which they both really, at some point, need to apologize for because they both said some pretty awful things. Both men seem to want to reconnect, but they end up sending colder versions of the text that they were originally considering. And for Randall, it kind of becomes a moot point or a backburnered issue because soon he's going to get the news about George Floyd, and that's going to overwhelm pretty much any other consideration, other than the safety of his mother, which is something we will get to. Beth and Randall are laying together, reacting to the news of George Floyd and what happened there. And Susan Watson and Sterling K. Brown are excellent in this scene and throughout the episode, really. You can't have an actor of Sterling K. Brown's talents and not delve into what happened here. We see Randall talking to his therapist via Zoom call, as that's the only way you can do it at this point in time because of COVID. And you really get the sense that Randall is not saying all that he needs to be saying, that he's holding back quite a bit. Randall is watching the TV with Beth and his girls about what's been going on with George Floyd, and he gets a bunch of texts from Kate, who's been attending protests with Jack. Kate asks him if there are other black causes that she can contribute to, and Randall doesn't seem to react very well to this. His reaction is underplayed, but you can see in Beth's face exactly how that would play. I get the sense here that Kate is trying to be supportive, but from Randall's perspective, maybe she's a little bit overbearing in this instance. And there's actually more issues that stem from this that I'll get into talking about later because it does come up again in a later scene. Randall during the scene really sounds like a person who's been pretty beaten down. I mean, he's had a lot happen to him in a short period of time, dating back to last season, with the robbery and all the things that happened there, and his mom's illness and all that, and what happened with his brother, and now what's happening with George Floyd and everything that's going on with that. Tess asked to change the channel from all the stuff that's going on to something else, and he changes it to Family Feud. And this falls into a scene with Kevin and Madison, who are watching the same thing. Now, curiously, we don't hear from Kevin on what's going on with George Floyd or anything else. He is the one person that doesn't really talk about it amongst the big three during the course of this episode. Madison suggests to Kevin that they join his mother and Miguel at the cabin for their 40th birthday, along with Kate as well, saying they can get tested in quarantine and then celebrate his birthday at the cabin. Madison feels the baby moving and has Kevin feel, and that leads to them clearly having slept together. Now, I'm not sure if this has been an ongoing thing at this point, or if this is the first time it's happened in a while. We see Kevin wide awake, looking at Madison sleeping. He seems pretty content. And then we cut to Randall and see him also not sleeping, but for very different reasons. Which brings us to the credits. After the credits, we have another Beth and Randall scene as they are just getting up, and Beth is trying to discuss plans. Randall seems to have a full boat with work and all that, and Beth seems concerned, non-verbally. She doesn't actually say it out loud, but Randall definitely picks up on it. Enough so that he shows her his hands, which are tremor-free, and assures her that he's talking to his therapist twice a day just to make sure that he's fine. He's not really talking about much, and I think he's holding back too much to really be useful therapy for him, a fact which is borne out by a later scene in the episode, but nevertheless he is talking to her. Beth tries to engage in physical activities. I have a 7-year-old who occasionally watches my videos, so I'm trying to keep it G-rated here, but I gather you know what I'm talking about. And Randall turns her down, which, I don't know, I don't necessarily think that's a good sign, really. But it isn't because he's cracking up, and we will get to what is exactly going on with Randall later in the episode, because right now he's kind of a blank slate to us. We don't really see or hear what's going on with Randall. We know he's not okay, but we don't exactly know what his problem is exactly, or how he is reacting to everything that's going on. We then cut to a young William scene. Young William, played by Jeremo Nakia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. He's been in 11 episodes of the series as a young William. And Jennifer C. Holmes as Laurel, who I think this is the first time we're getting any real characterization of her in this series. William and Laurel, of course, being Randall's biological parents. I only have a few comments about their scenes. I don't really have much else to talk about. But one impression I get is that William is so in love. He has love pouring out of every part of his soul that I think he would literally do anything that Laurel wanted to do. Also, she announces that William is going to be a father rather casually in the midst of friends who were talking politics at the time. And that seemed kind of odd to me. I figured you'd do something like that in private before you tell friends, but, you know, I'm not them, so I guess this works for them. Still, I found it kind of strange. The reason Laurel is getting so much characterization here will become apparent at the end. And oh, believe me, we will talk about that. We do have some Jack and Rebecca scenes in this episode, and for the most part, I'm not that interested in talking about it. We go back to when the big three were born, or the big two. Randall was apparently born the day before. But we've seen this so many times that I don't think there's anything left to see here. And I don't think we can come back here after this episode. So Jack has now called his dad on the day of his parents' birth when his children were in jeopardy, and he was worried about that. And we see him going to the chapel, and he runs across William a couple of times, which if they had had a conversation, that would have just been too much. So I'm glad they didn't go there. But other than that, there's just nothing here that we really need to see. There is one decent Rebecca scene during all this, where Rebecca is talking about how men are taught to hide their feelings and show strength all the time, which I think ties into both Kevin and Randall's issues as adults. This is the season premiere, and of course, Milo Ventimiglia, who plays Jack, is going to be in the episode because he's a beloved character, but we're getting to a point where there's really nothing new to say about him. And then we are at the cabin with Miguel, Rebecca, Toby, and Kate. Kevin and Madison are also at the cabin, but they are not in this scene. Rebecca asks about the adoption that Kate and Toby are trying to have, and Kate comes back with a funny line that is like, "Mom, it's not Amazon, and it made me laugh. Kate, as I said, comes off. This is really a good episode for Kate, all around. The adoption is not a big part of this episode. I'm assuming it's going to be a storyline in the next episode, and I get the feeling it's not going to go well, judging from the previews. I think it's going to be like kind of like Gilligan's Island, where they're constantly close to actually adopting and it not working out. I kind of hope that's not the direction that they end up going in. After Kevin's shower, in which we had a very strategically placed mirror, which amused the heck out of me. What can I say? I'm easily amused. We run into Madison, who is concerned about her child because she fell. Her children, again, they're twins. And they decide that they have to go to the hospital to get it checked out. Madison doesn't want Kate to know because she doesn't want her to worry. I'm a little curious about the logistics, about exactly how they managed to get out of the house without being seen or having to explain where they're going. I can imagine that they made up some excuse as to why they were leaving, but we don't exactly get that scene. And I actually had the same question later, and I'll talk about that later, with the scene where Kevin really should have passed Kate and noticed that she was upset. But he gives no indication of that in a later scene, and like I said, I'll get to that. We cut back to the past with William, who is holding Randall, baby Randall, and Laurel is overdosing on the floor. The paramedics are trying to save her. They don't seem successful. And one of the paramedics makes a reference to calling child services, which William definitely hears and decides to leave, basically to escape. I get the impression here that he thinks he's going to end up losing Randall anyway. And that's an impression that I'm sure he carried for the rest of his life. It doesn't seem like he ever explained that to Randall. Now, I'm not sure why William thought abandoning him at a fire station was a better idea than just letting the system take care of it. But then again, I don't think that William is really thinking here at all. I think he's just reacting out of fear and grief. We have a scene with what seems to be the beginning of Randall's 40th birthday. He is clearly not okay. He's trying to fake it, though. I think they all see through him. Tess is complaining about not going to the cabin where the rest of the family is. Deja is defending Randall, but she has a hidden agenda because Malik is coming over and they're celebrating their 1-year anniversary. And this is where we start syncing up with the future events that we saw in the mid-season finale, with Rebecca having her no good, rotten, bad day. This is another point where the awkward shoehorning of COVID into the storyline comes into play. Because when we saw Rebecca on these events, Rebecca was going to stores and restaurants with no mask on. Now, I realize that this is tough to avoid because they didn't know this was going on or going to go on during these events, but it's still worth noting. Kevin and Madison are at the hospital. The doctor came and could only find one heartbeat. So she's off getting equipment to try again and see if she can get the 2 heartbeats that she needs to be getting. Kevin has decided to act like Jack and give a romantic and reassuring speech. And in the midst of that, he proposes. Alright, so here's the thing. I love Madison and Kevin in this episode. In the mid-season finale, though, I pointed out how absurd it was for Kevin to be engaged. That it was a very rushed timeline for him to suddenly be engaged to someone with a kid coming on along the way. And this really did nothing to change my mind about that. it's still a pretty rushed timeline. None of this spells successful relationship to me. Though, like I said, I would really like to see it happen because I loved Kevin and Madison in this episode. It was the romantic pairing that I never knew I wanted. And who knows, maybe they will beat the odds. Stranger things have certainly happened. I'm just not seeing it. I don't think it's going to, unfortunately. We next have our Malik and Randall scene, which, by the way, is an absolutely excellent scene in a show full of them. It was probably the best use of Malik up to this point since his tenure that started last year. Malik sees Randall sitting on the steps and asks if he's in trouble. Randall's confused and asks why, and Malik mentions that whenever his dad is in trouble, he'll sit on the steps. Malik asks him if Randall is okay, and he mentions the fact that he's been there for like 5 seconds and he hasn't made a dad joke. And you gotta check on your strong friends. Randall very lightly and jokingly tells Malik that they are not friends. That he's, I can barely bring myself to say this, dating his daughter. This leads into a serious discussion about what happened with George Floyd. And this is one of the few times up to this point where Randall has been honest about where he's at mentally and emotionally. Malik mentions that his dad has been taking him on walks to talk about things, about what's going on. In response to this, Randall brings up Johnny Gamage, a former Pittsburgh Steeler. I looked him up. He is indeed a real person. He died on October 12th, 1995 at 31 years old, killed by the police. For context, that would make Randall about 15 years old at the time of this incident. 4 years prior to that was the Rodney King beating, for further context. These incidents would have been formative for Randall, and it clearly stuck in his mind enough to bring it up to Malik now. He mentions to Malik that there were no walks with his father, there were no conversations. He had to go through this alone. Now, we have seen throughout the series Jack attempting to deal with the fact that he has a black son. We've seen both Rebecca and Jack try to deal with that and try to navigate the feelings that Randall would be feeling. They clearly failed him here, though. Jack had a reputation early in the series, and Rebecca too, for being perfect parents. And that has been pretty thoroughly deconstructed as the series has gone along. In fact, Jack's reputation was deconstructed in the second episode of the series. You can go back and watch that video. So Jack and Rebecca were never perfect. I don't think the creators were trying to give the impression that they were saints or perfect. But in my view, they always had good intentions, and they definitely loved their kids, all three of them. But they definitely didn't navigate these issues very well, especially when it came to the football player that Randall is referencing here, and probably the Rodney King beatings either. Randall, at 11 years old, would definitely have been old enough to have that conversation with at that time. From here, we go back to the dad jokes that Malik had been expecting from the beginning. He jokingly says that as it turns out, Malik is actually his best friend. But he has to choose. He has to choose between dating his daughter and being Randall's best friend. And Randall, I think, makes a pretty good case here in saying that he can actually drive, whereas Deja can't. But Malik wisely chooses Deja. For the record, I think he chose wisely, Malik. Malik goes inside to see Deja, and at that moment, Randall gets a text from Kate saying that their mother is missing and she doesn't know what to do. Madison and Kevin arrive back at the cabin, and I find it very strange that Kevin doesn't know what's going on here. That he doesn't know that his mother is missing. Alright, so while in the hospital, maybe he wasn't checking his phone, or maybe he didn't have access to it because you're not supposed to have your phone on in the hospital. But after they got out, wouldn't Kevin have checked his phone? Wouldn't Kevin have noticed that Kate was constantly trying to call him? Did Kate try to text him? Why doesn't he know about his mother? I just found that a little bit odd. Kevin is about to go looking for her, but Miguel is on the phone with the police, and they tell him that they got her. Miguel suggests to them that when Rebecca gets there, that they appear calm, as to not freak Rebecca out. And I'm sure when he's saying this, that he is freaking out himself. Rebecca comes home. They all talk to the police. Kevin at that point mentions the fact that him and Madison are engaged, which surprises Kate. And then Kate and Kevin have a little scene where she mentions, hey, at some point you're going to have to explain that. And they talk about Rebecca and how it's really just too soon for Rebecca to be disintegrating this fast. There's a knock at the door. Kevin goes to get it, and it's Randall, who came because their mother was in trouble. It's a little bit awkward. Randall pretty much seems like he'd rather be anywhere else but there at that moment. Randall wants to go upstairs and see their mom, which he should be really doing with a mask, but whatever. Kevin assures him that there was no way to know that this was going to happen, that she seemed great before she left. And Randall says that he believes them. I'm not sure that he does. I think he's lying here, to be honest with you. Rebecca wakes up and is surprised and delighted to see Randall sitting there. She asks about his wife and the girls, and he tells her that they aren't there. Rebecca explains the experience and asks if he thinks that this would have happened if she were in St. Louis. St. Louis, the drug trial and all that was canceled, by the way. I didn't mention that, I don't think. Randall says that he doesn't know, and he apologizes for pushing her on that. Those of you who watched my videos last year know that I was pretty critical of Randall's actions there, particularly his tactics and his emotional blackmail, which I thought was just awful of him. So it's good to see him acknowledging that. Rebecca brings up the fact that she saw what was essentially a hallucination of William, that she's been thinking about him a lot, and about how she kept him from him. Likely brought on by Randall's emotional blackmail. Randall tells her that they don't need to talk about that, and Rebecca comes back with, if not now, then when? And that line hurt. The fact of the matter is, this illness is going to take her memories sooner or later. So if they don't make peace now, then when are they going to? Especially since the events that Rebecca just experienced. Rebecca brings up her poison ivy, which is how Randall eventually figures out what happened. And what happened is, the medication that Rebecca used to treat her poison ivy reacted badly with her condition. So, the events of this episode were not a sign that she is in sharp decline. Rebecca repeats her question from earlier about Beth and the girls, and Randall gently repeats the fact that they are not there, but they would be so next time. We cut to Kevin, and I'm not entirely sure what he's doing. Is he listening at Rebecca's door, spying on Randall and Rebecca? I think that's what's going on, but it's not really clear. Kate scares the crap out of him, and she insists that he needs to fix things with Randall. She has picked up on the fact that Randall is also acting weird with her, though she misdiagnoses why. Either way, Kate feels that they need to fix this, Kevin specifically, so that they could have the Big Three chant and have their 40th birthday celebration. We get a Miguel and Toby scene, and I honestly feel like Miguel doesn't get enough scenes in this show. A lot of the times, Miguel is invisible, and that kind of bothers me a little bit. Miguel is telling Toby that when they came out there, it seemed like Rebecca was a new woman. Like being at the cabin refreshed Rebecca, and she seemed like the Rebecca of old. And then her very bad day happened. In response, Toby relates a story. He tells Miguel about his depression and the medication that he's on. He isn't aware if anybody but Kate knows about that. And he mentions that one day he called for a refill, and the doctor said that it was just automatic. And the fact that it was automatic hit Toby hard. It made Toby wonder if he was ever going to be better, if he was ever going to be able to stop taking that medication, or if he was going to have to take it for the rest of his life. He expressed those concerns to his doctor, and his doctor came back with 1 day at a time. A great TV show, in Toby's opinion, but terrible advice for Toby's situation. This is Toby's long-winded way of saying that Rebecca had a bad day. She will have many bad days, but she will also have plenty of good days. There are plenty of good days left. And Toby thinks that Miguel needs to show Rebecca that there is a future, that there is a good and happy future left for the two of them, 1 day at a time. Another fantastic scene in an episode full of them, really. And like I said, Miguel doesn't get enough play within this series. And for the record, Miguel later takes Toby's advice, and it seems to work pretty well, at least for this episode and this moment in time. 1 day at a time. After they discovered the reason behind Rebecca's episode, for lack of a better word, Randall decides it's time to go. He gives Toby and Miguel a warm goodbye and kind of a more awkward goodbye from a distance to Kate and Kevin, which leads into the scene with Kate and Randall, where Kate follows him out and has a conversation with him. I had to watch this scene more than a few times to fully grasp what was going on in this scene. And I think I admit that my initial impressions were off. I initially thought that Randall was being overly harsh on Kate. I really didn't know what I was going to say about this scene. I had to sit with it for a while. And I went on the message boards and the groups, the Facebook groups, and read people's comments about this scene. Something I don't usually do. I like to form my own opinions and then seek out those opinions after the fact. But in this case, I wanted to see what other people were saying. And I should say right up front that I am more in Kate's shoes than I am in Randall's. I know more than Kate does. But nevertheless, I cannot fully understand what it is like to be Randall in this situation, because I don't deal with the things that he does. I am a highly empathetic individual, and I am always willing to learn. I will not be able to fully explain Randall's position here, even as I have a high level of empathy for it. Odds are I will get things wrong in this conversation or this monologue. Just like Kate and many more, I am still learning. But also like Kate, I'm willing to learn. And there are many who aren't. So let's get into it. Kate comes outside and tells Randall, who clearly just wants to leave, that she was hoping that he would talk to Kevin and sort things out. She claims to be Sweden, that she is neutral, and Randall doesn't seem too impressed by that and turns around to leave. She then asks if they are okay, if things are okay between him and Kate, that she has been very concerned about him because of everything that's been going on, that she's been trying to reach out and hasn't been getting much back, that she's worried about the girls and Beth, that she is overwhelmed by everything that is going on. She is overwhelmed, and she can only imagine how they all feel. And she says she's sorry. Randall responds with, "Sorry about what? Specifically, what are you apologizing for?" Kate's confused by this. She says she's sorry about what's going on in the country, the protests. Randall says, "Okay, but you never apologized before, and this isn't the first black man to be killed on camera." Kate says, "No, it's not, but this feels different." And here's where I ask a question. Why is this different? This has been going on a while. There have been many such instances, including Eric Garner, which was similar to this, though not the same. There was a Trayvon Martin thing. This has been going on and on. Why is this all of a sudden getting such attention? Why are we paying attention now? I mean, there are people paying attention. I'm one of them. There have been plenty of posts and conversations about incidents such as George Floyd and what occurred there. But at the same time, it doesn't usually last. It's what I call the outrage of the week. Something bad happens. We all talk about it for a little while, and then we stop. It's the same thing with mental health and mental illness issues. Something will happen, we'll talk about it, and then we'll stop. And these conversations cannot just stop and occur when something bad happens. They have to be ongoing. In my We Can't Breathe video, I mentioned towards the end that if you're only a temporary member of the cause, then you're not really doing any good. If you're only here for the moment and then gone the next, nothing is going to change like that. You are not part of the solution. You have to stay with it. You have to stay with the cause on a continuous basis. There's a movie called Selma that was out a few years ago about the Selma March and Martin Luther King. And late in that movie, there's a comment from a black activist saying that the white people are involved and we can't always count on them to stick around. So we gotta take advantage of that. And that really hit me. We white people weave our way in and out of the cause willy-nilly, whereas the black community doesn't have that luxury. They have to live with this every single day of their lives. Randall responds to Kate's comment about it feeling different. "Not for me, Kate. It's never been different for me. We grew up in the same house. This has been happening for years, and we've never talked about it. Not once. Not once in 40 years." And Kate is crying at this point. She says, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And here is where I am in Kate's shoes more than Randall. I do not always express myself well out loud. I am awkward, and I trip over my words a lot. I am better in writing. I have to write things down in order to be able to express myself properly, especially when my emotions are involved. As a result, I avoid conflict. I avoid difficult conversations. I was hesitant to make my We Can't Breathe video for a number of reasons. One, my channel is not about politics. I generally avoid politics. I am a mental health and illness awareness advocate, and I believe staying out of politics is for the best when it comes to those issues. When it comes to the fight to end the stigma on mental illness, we need as many allies as we can get, and everybody experiences mental health issues across the political spectrum. But I resolved to make the video anyway, because I am not going to take the position that even racists have mental health issues. I'm just not going to do that. The second reason that I was hesitant to do it is that I didn't want to say something stupid. I didn't want to land myself in a heap load of controversy because I don't express myself all that well all the time. Even writing things down, I occasionally trip over myself. That's just a fact. But here's the thing, and this is the reason why I'm bringing this up. In an effort to not say the wrong thing, we end up saying nothing at all. And that cannot stand. We do not improve what's going on in the world without conversations, without an open dialogue. And that means risking saying the wrong thing. And that means, well, let me get to Randall's next comment first before moving on. And Randall says, okay, so growing up, and Randall is in tears when he's saying this, I just had to keep many things to myself because I didn't want to make you guys feel bad. I didn't want you guys to have to worry about saying the wrong thing. Kate's crying at this point. Well, you're right. We never talked about it as kids. And I think mom and dad did the best they could, I guess, but I didn't get involved. I didn't even... And she doesn't get a chance to finish that sentence because Randall interrupts her. See, I hate this, Kate. I hate seeing you upset. And normally I would hug you, and I would tell you that you did all the right things, and I would make things all okay for you. But if I did that, Kate, where does that leave me? I'm sorry, but I can't do that. That has been my pattern my entire life. And honestly, Kate, it's exhausting. I'm exhausted. So, Kate worries about saying the wrong thing. And Randall worries about upsetting Kate. And them worrying about saying the wrong thing. And as a result, these conversations don't happen. And they really need to. Randall says that all he wants to do is go home, be with his wife, and his girls. And Kate says, okay, I love you. And Randall responds that he loves her too. And happy birthday. This is an absolute phenomenal scene. Both actors really do a great job here in a very, very difficult scene. However many awards Sterling K. Brown ends up winning, it won't be enough. We later see Kate with Toby after this experience, and she doesn't want comfort from Toby. She wants to sit with her feelings, and she wants to use this as a learning opportunity. What this scene really represents is growth for both characters. For Randall, this is what healing looks like, and he's not fully done in this episode doing that. We're also not done with the difficult scenes, because next we get a Kevin and Randall scene before Randall manages to drive away. Once again, I'm a little confused about the logistics here. How does Kevin not pass Kate and see that she's upset on his way out the door to go and chase Randall down? Because he seems to have no knowledge of what just transpired there. I mean, it's really besides the point, but it is something that I noticed. This scene is just as painful, but in a more subtler way. Kevin comes running out to Randall to say that he appreciates him coming down and doing what he did for his mother. And he gives Randall the news that he's going to have both a boy and a girl, and that he's the first person that he told. Honestly, I think this entire conversation is a pretext to Kevin opening up the lines of dialogue and trying to heal the relationship between him and Randall after last season's finale. Randall, who's trying to leave, closes the door and congratulates Kevin. Kevin mentions that, he was a boy once, so he should know what to do there. But a girl, he's not so sure. And he's asking for advice. And once again, I don't really think that he's asking for advice at all. I think he's just trying to talk with Randall. Randall says, "You'll let her get away with anything, but her mom will be there to fix your mistakes. Mom will probably be better at everything." Some took that as a slam on Kevin. I don't see it. I think Randall is talking about himself at that moment. That's how he views his role in his own family. Kevin responds with, "She probably will be. In the strangest way, I think I may have found somebody really special." And this line hurts, not in the delivery, but in the subtext. Because I know what Kevin is doing here. One of the things that probably hurt Kevin the most in the finale was when Randall said to him, "You will never know what it is like to devote yourself to someone, because all you ever care about is yourself. And you will just be pretending. The same tired performance, like all of your performances." I think those words are in Kevin's mind right now. And I think they have pretty much stuck with him. I think that's what's driving a lot of what he's doing with Madison. And I see this as him trying to sell someone he cares about, that he's estranged with, that he is truly trying to do better, that he is doing better. And I've been there. I've done that. I've been in that exact situation where part of the conversation is responding to criticisms of you in the past. Kevin really wants to reconnect here, and I think if the conversation had gone on longer, he would have gotten around to starting the apology. But Randall's not in the proper headspace to deal with it. He's got too much else on his mind. And I also think that Randall wants to reconnect. Randall wants to be a part of this happiness with Kevin, but he just can't be now. We next see Randall calling his therapist, his white therapist for the record, and he essentially breaks up with her. He tells her that he consciously sought her out and that he leaves a lot outside the door, that there are things that he's not comfortable talking to her about. related to him being a black man. And he feels he needs to make a change because he will never get better if he doesn't address those issues. All I gotta say about that to Randall is good for you. This is a sign that you are truly moving towards healing. Truly moving towards being a mentally healthy human being. We get a scene, one of the final scenes of the episode, with Randall, Beth, and the kids. Randall, once again, assures his wife that he's not cracking up, that he's probably healthier than he has been in years. That because of everything that's going on with his people, with their people, he's just sad. Deeply, deeply sad. Beth tells a story about her father, and she's mainly trying to tell Randall that he was born of tragedy with his biological parents, and what happened with Jack and Rebecca losing their child, their third one. And look at all the things that he was able to accomplish, born of that tragedy. Look at the girls in the room. He did that. He accomplished that. He built that. And as far as everything else in the world that's going on, Beth says, we fight on. Beth says that the pain is not forever. This moment is not forever. Nothing is. Except us. Randall's final line is in response to Beth asking if he was expecting a surprise party. He says they could all use a year with no surprises. Well, that's cute, Randall. Except for the fact that you exist on this show. The final scene is with Laurel, back in the past. We think she's dead of an overdose. And then suddenly, she breathes. Okay. Are we really doing this show? Are we really doing this? We already did the whole plot line of someone we think is dead is actually alive thing with Nikki. That worked out okay, but I think you're going to that well a little too much here. This is not a daytime soap. This is a realistic family drama, and having Laurel suddenly be alive is just not realistic. What are we going to do next season? Oh, Jack is actually alive. He's been alive this entire time, but he's been in hiding. William didn't really die. So on and so forth. Look, we have plenty of material within the show, and let's be honest, the show is not going to be around for too much longer. So do we really need to introduce Randall's biological mother coming back into the picture? Okay, so that final scene aside, and the other few niggling problems I had with this episode, this was a fantastic premiere, and I look forward to the season. Now, I want to address something before I go. There were more than a few people who did not like this show because they wanted to be more escapist, or they thought it was too political. And I'm not sure where these people are coming from. Or I do know where they're coming from, and I don't agree. Art is not always escapism. When we're talking about TV shows or books or movies, these art forms are not always about escapism. Sometimes these platforms are used to talk about actual issues that are going on in our lives. They are mirrors for what happens in our lives. And sometimes they are used to express what it means to be human. I mean, the human experience. This Is Us has never shied away from dealing with issues. They've tackled topics from alcoholism to the disease that Rebecca has, and so on and so forth. And as far as too political, this episode doesn't address the election at all. It doesn't once bring up Trump or Biden. So for the most part, what you're really saying is that you don't like that the show tackled racism and the Black Lives Matter movement, even without bringing up the name. This show has never been afraid to tackle racial issues, particularly when it comes to Randall's family situation, the awkwardness of being a black man raised in a white family. And I applaud the show for doing that, because they could have just as easily swept that under the rug and not addressed it at all. So for those with that opinion, I'm just not sure what show you've been watching all this time. Because it seems like This Is Us has always been addressing difficult topics. It has never been pure escapism. That's one of the reasons why I love this show so much, and why I make videos on it. I use This Is Us as a means to talk about these issues. But anyway, I think that's enough for one video. I think I've covered all that I want to talk about, and this is already getting pretty long. So, I will see you guys next time, probably for the third episode of this season, which looks to be a Kate and Toby episode. If you like this video, please like it, share the video, and subscribe to my channel. I could use all the help I could get. This is Dave from Corn Productions, signing off.